Hi, this is Dr. Mary, and in today's session of Purposeful Learning, the Key to Remembering Information, we're going to discuss the 4 A's of learning. So let's start by talking about why is it that you study? Some students study to get a better grade. Some students just study to pass the test. But essentially, shouldn't you be studying to learn? And how many times have you studied and you put in the time and you studied hard and you wrote out your notes and you just found that you didn't do as well on the test or the assignment as you thought? Well, apparently you really didn't learn. So let's talk about how we can improve that learning. So this is a sentence from educational psychology, and this is really important, and we're going to tear this apart. So learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior and mental associations due to experience. Now there's 3 key aspects of this that we're going to talk about. So the sentence said it was a relatively permanent change. Well, that's because there are times when we forget. And there's 2 theories of forgetting. One is decay and one is experience. And decay is when you haven't used that information in quite a while. You know, we can think about it as being stored in the back of our brain. It's covered in dust and cobwebs, and we just can't get to it. We know it's there, but we just can't come up with it. Well, that information has decayed. Those connections have decayed because you haven't used that information in a while. Well, you can essentially remember that information if I were to prompt you or cue you. It's still there, but you just need to be prompted or cued. The other theory of forgetting is called interference, and you've probably had this happen. The information is on the tip of your tongue and you just can't get to it. You know it's there, you just can't get to it. Well, something's interfering with it. So what you can do to overcome that is just think about, this is how I'm going to remember it this time. This is how I'm going to remember this person's name next time. So you set up some kind of a cue or a prompt or some kind of way that you're going to remember this information to overcome that interference. So essentially, when you're remembering information, you can remember it probably forever. So another key aspect that we need to think about is the study techniques or the strategies that you use are going to affect what you remember. So this is very important. So this is the study strategies that you use affect whether you remember the information or not. So a lot of students will use specific techniques, and we'll discuss the good ones and the bad ones. So today we're going to focus on the 4 A's of learning. Now these A's are active, associate, anticipate, and awareness. And we'll talk about these each one at a time. The first A is active. That means you have to be active with the information. You have to be actively doing something with the information in order to really learn it. So some common strategies that students use are flashcards. Now you've probably used flashcards, I know I did. But it's not very effective if you think about it. And isn't it really challenging? Isn't it really difficult? You have to go over those flashcards time and time again. You don't really remember the information, you're actually just memorizing it. And since you have to go over it time and time again, we call that maintenance rehearsal. You're having to rehearse it, and rehearse it. And then when you studied with flashcards, have you ever dropped them on the floor? Wow. What happens then? You're kind of in a panic, right? Because you've actually learned that information in sequence. So now you have to start all over. And it's very intensive, effort-wise and time-wise. Some students actually rewrite their notes. Some reread their notes. Again, this is very intensive effort-wise. It takes a long time and it takes a lot of power on your side to remember this information. But you know, when it gets down to it, you probably really didn't learn it. Again, you probably just remembered or memorized some of the information. And then some students reread. So they might read the information out of a textbook, or maybe you've got the information electronically. It's still rereading. And this is very time consuming. It takes you a long time, and again, the payoff isn't that great. So these strategies are some of those strategies that are ineffective. And when we're using these strategies, that information is actually going into what we call our short-term memory. And it really is short-term. And it's short-term because it's limited in 3 essential ways. One is it's limited in duration, meaning that you can't remember that stuff for a long time. So if you've tried to remember information, you can't hold it in there for very long. It's like it wants to come out, you've got to keep going over it and over it and over it. A good example of that is if you've ever gone to the store and you've got several things that you want to buy, and you get into the store and you can't remember them all. you've lost that information because it's limited in duration. The other limitation is capacity. What we know is that we can typically remember 7 plus or minus 2 items. So that means we can remember 5 to 9 things. That's not a lot. Typically when you're studying, you have to remember more than that. So your short-term memory is not a good storage space for learning. And then the last limitation is manipulation. When you study something by way of memorization or rehearsal, you really can't manipulate that information. What you know is what you studied on the flashcard or what you've reread in your notes. You really can't do much with that information. It's not really useful to you. You can't apply it. You can't use it in any way. You can't describe it. So it's really not learning. Again, it's memorizing. What we really want to do is store that information into our long-term memory. And this is what a picture of our brain looks like. And we know from science that our brain learns by way of connections, relationships, associations. So if I were to ask you to think about pizza, part of your brain would light up. If I were to ask you to think about baseball, another part of your brain would light up. We learn by way of connections, associations. So this is what your brain really looks like. You can see that there's neurons and there's synapses that connect information from one thing to another. It's all relative. It's all associated. So essentially, your brain is full of filing cabinets. Your brain wants to be organized. It wants to store information in a category. So if your brain wants to store information that way, why don't you study that way? Wouldn't that be better? So with that in mind, our second A is associate. We need to make associations, connections. So when we're learning new information, we need to think about, what do I already know about this? Have I already seen this before? Have I read a case study about it? Have I heard about it before? So what essentially we need to do is connect this new information to prior knowledge, to the stuff that you already know. When we're making those connections, make it personal. We all know personal information, whether it's from a vacation, whether it's from other classes that you've taken, things that are important to you. So think about when you're learning this new information, how can I connect this to something that's meaningful to me, that makes sense to me? Have you ever studied a friend's notes and you think about, wow, why did they write that down? Why did she write that down? Or why did he write that down? It makes no sense to you. But if you write down something that's personal to you, you're going to remember it better. So making those personal connections, associations to the things that you know. Our next A is anticipate. And this is where we want to anticipate uses or apply the information. We're going to use the information in some way to broaden it, to deepen that understanding that we have of that concept. So the good way to do that is by what we call elaborative interrogation, asking questions. How would I use this? Why would I use this procedure? Why would I use that formula? Why would I not? What results would I expect to see? So it's asking questions about the concept so that you can broaden and deepen it, so you have a better understanding, a more thorough understanding. A lot of times students are encouraged to say, what else would I do? What if I do this? And again, thinking within your discipline. So if you're studying chemistry, think about it from that perspective. If you're studying to be an airline pilot, think about it from that perspective. So putting some personal meaning around it, so it resonates to you, so that makes sense to you, so that it's more applicable to you. And the last A is awareness. And this is key. Maybe you've studied all day, or maybe even for just an hour, and you think, wow, I have no idea what I just read, or I have no idea what I just studied. Has that ever happened to you? So we need to be aware of what it is that we're learning, what we're studying. So again, we need to question, what is it that I know? And I think more importantly, what is it that I don't know? And a good way to assess that is, can you talk about it? If you can talk about the information, you can be assured that you know it. So say it. If you can't say it, you don't know it. So these are our 4 A's. You need to be active, you need to associate, you need to anticipate, and the entire time that you're learning and studying, be aware. Are you really learning this?